Welcome to Southern Cooking Made Simple by Melanie. These are some stories from my life and times here in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. Dating back into the 50s, I was born in 1957.
My family all came from Clay County, West Virginia. My name is Melanie Foster. I was raised in Dixie, Clay County, West Virginia. My mom was Barbara June Holcomb. She was raised in a 3-room house in Klein Holler, Indore, West Virginia. Her mother was Ada Marie Holcomb. She was the daughter of Lily Missouri and Bernard Breckenridge Legg. Back in the day, she was raised at the head of that same holler, and her mother Lily was a Cherokee Indian. I loved to visit Grandma Lily's. She always had chickens on Sunday. It was a tradition to have chicken on Sunday. She was taught to use the scraps, the neck, the giblets, and the back and the skin to make the dumplings, and then she fried the chicken. They had a big wood-burning cook stove in the kitchen. It sat catty corner, and she always had pies on top shelf. She'd make berry pies all the time. They had rhubarb and strawberries and everything out in their garden, and she would go out and get that stuff and bake them pies. Oh my goodness, she could cook. Everybody would fly through the house to see what pies Mama had on that top shelf of that stove. We had to draw water in from the well. We had to bring the water in buckets, and we'd set it up on that stove so she'd have water to cook dinner and we could do the dishes. They had a long picnic type of table in the dining room. Mama would make all those pies, and she was a stupendous cook. She was an Indian, and she boiled the bones with her chicken to get the delicious flavor in her dumplings. Her wilted lettuce was absolutely to die for. We would all pile in on those big old picnic table type benches, and my mom and papa would sit at each end. There was a big picture of my grandma Lily in the living room with big long black braids hanging down. She had to be looking into the lens of that camera because everywhere you walked in that living room, she was staring right straight at you. It was kind of spooky, and Indians staring at you no matter where you went. Mama Marie had been taught by the best. She had an Indian teaching her. Can you only imagine the things that she knew about cooking and canning? Everything that they had was grew in their garden in the summer. They were very poor, and they canned everything that they needed for a year, every summer. They grew tomatoes for spaghetti and chili and soups and stews, and they grew green beans, and we would string them and pack them into jars, or we would string them on string on thread and make leather breeches out of them. I don't know if you've ever had leather breeches, but they're awesome. But they have to be prepared right. They would put their food in a big kettle outside in the yard. The men and the boys would grow and harvest the food, and it was the girls and the rest of the family's job to pack and seal them. If one person was canning, they all was canning. My grandparents involved everyone in their task. The children all participated in the harvest, canning, and the preservation of the bounty. It was a combined effort. Everyone helped. We had leather breeches to hang and dry, and deer jerky and sausages to make. We made apple butter in a huge kettle out in the yard with a gigantic stirrer in there. And we wrapped the jars with a t-shirt type of material so they wouldn't bounce and break in the water. Cooking things in the yard was very common with my grandparents. They were extremely poor people, but we didn't know it. No one had any idea we was poor. None of us did. We were happy as can be, and we didn't have a clue we were poor. We had a hunting camp in Sugar Grove, Virginia. It was a magical time at the camp. In the fall of the year, we would pack up warm clothes and warm bedclothes, and off we'd go to Sugar Grove, Virginia. Mom had 4 brothers and 3 sisters, and the boys would be cleaning their guns and all gathering in around the potbelly stove to get warm and dry their socks and their gloves off and boast about their catch that day, tell the story about their hunt. Oh, Papa used to love to tell about his bear hunts. He could tell you, oh, it was fun to hear him tell those stories. Life was perfect back then, people, and following all those annual traditions in my family was so much fun. My mama's sisters were taught the barefoot cooking techniques from a Cherokee Indian. They were stupendous cooks. Mama's sister Pauline married an Italian immigrant son whom they had just migrated here to work in the coal fields. Settlers came here to West Virginia from all over the world. When the coal miners needed more workers than the mountains could provide, they paid men to come here to work. They were promised a job, and their trip was paid for them and their family. My Aunt Pauline had just married an Italian man. His family moved not 1 mile up the road from her house at Montgomery. We would all go to Aunt Pauline's and visit all the time. She and my mom were very close. She was learning daily from her new mother-in-law, straight from Italy, how to cook to these hills of West Virginia. And my mom used to take me to the movies in Montgomery, and Pauline lived right up the road. She would wait at Pauline's house till 10, 11 o'clock at night, waiting on me to get done at the movies. Pauline taught my mom everything that she had just learned to do from her mother-in-law, Mitty. My goodness, what cooks they were. You have no idea, people. It was amazing the things that she knew and the meals that she could come up with. Salsas and ways to use tomatoes was astounding. Tomatoes became my passion also. I'm 62, and every time I make spaghetti sauce, I try to make it taste just like my Aunt Pauline's did. You could smell the spaghetti sauce as soon as you opened the front door. Oh, and it was fantastic. She always had cooked squid in hers. I didn't know. I called it an octopus when I was teeny. When I got old enough to stir in the pot, I saw those huge tentacles in there. Weird, funny-looking thing. I questioned it, but my love for her sauce was immense. I fell in love with it long before I knew that it had an octopus in there. It was beyond awesome. That and her breads and salads, oh my gosh. She really made a big impression on my mom, who was already a phenomenal cook herself. I have a large family to be an only child. Mom's 7 siblings. I just fit right in with that whole bunch. I don't recall Pauline ever going to the hunting camp because her husband didn't hunt, but everybody else did, all the men. That was a tradition in my family also. Every fall, like clockwork, we would all pile in at the camp. Everything changed at the camp. The food changed. We brought all the staples from home so they could cook. They cooked out the camp just like they did here in West Virginia. But it probably was a little bit better because they had a wood-fired stove out there. They had biscuits and red-eye gravy, and uh, she would put her fried pork that she'd bring it from home. They always had pigs. And she'd put that pork on in the morning. You could smell that cooking, coffee cooking, and she'd pour that coffee over that pork and make red-eyed gravy and biscuits. Oh my gosh, could she cook. They always had pigs in West Virginia. There was a footbridge across the creek there at the house, and everybody would carry a bucket of slop over there to feed the hogs. And feed the dogs over there too while you was over there, because Papa had dogs, uh, hunting dogs trained and hung up. They were tied up over there. The food at the camp depended on what game that they brought in that day. If it was a bear, the bear was an extremely fat type of meat. And there were certain things that Grandma taught us to do to that meat. And now if it was a deer, that was a very lean meat. So there were things that we had to do to that meat also. My papa was a taxidermist, and I never knew what would be staring at me when I'd go down to the freezer to get something, a package of meat or pork or something for Mama. She would let me help her cook. When I was a tiny thing, I'd say, Mama, can I help you cook? And she'd say, yeah, go get me some lettuce and green onions and a tomato for the salad. She would let me use a butter knife to cook the salad. I learned a lot at a very early age. How to make homemade salad dressings, which is now another passion of mine. Our families were sustained by their gardening, their canning, and their preserving. That's all they had. The meats were hunted for, frozen, and canned. Excuse me. They grew tomatoes and green beans for soups and stews and sauces, and they grew cucumbers for making all their pickles. Mama would say, go down to the basement and get me a jar of dill pickles or some sweet relish. That's how it was got. That's how you got it. If you wanted food, you had to can it up in the summertime, or you didn't have that food that winter. They couldn't go out to the grocery store and buy stuff. They didn't have the money. We had so many family traditions for the fall. We did apple butter and chow chow, canning and preserving. In the spring, we had ramp feeds, or the Feast of the Rampson. I don't know if you've ever ate ramps, but they're fantastic. We had ramps, ham, pinto soup beans, cornbread. The ramps were boiled, and then you take them out of that, and then you fry them in bacon grease. They had pies and cakes and pan-fried trout on the riverbank. We foraged for everything: muggles or morels, greens and poke greens, shawnee and bear's paw. They collected walnuts and chestnuts, and Papa would bring sassafras in to make tea out of. It was delicious. Ramps and the greens. They hunted game for the meats. They fished. They had bear, deer, squirrel, grouse, pheasant, turkey. Ramp digging in the spring. We didn't go to the store to buy snacks and treats. We made them from scratch. Cookies, pies, donuts, potato chips, french fries, some of the best hamburgers and homemade buns you've ever tasted in your life. Mama would make that homemade fudge in the winter when it was a snow one, and you'd go in there and be trying to get warmed up, and she'd have you a hot cup of cocoa there. Oh my goodness, and they used yellow root all the time for sore throat. My dad was Charles Fitzwater. He was raised in Little Laurel Holler, Clay County, West Virginia. There were 5 children, and my dad said that they moved a lot when he was a kid. He said that the chickens would go out in the front yard and cross their legs because they knew they was going to move. You think he had been gathering up a bunch of chickens, chasing around chickens, or what? He was so funny. He was so very animated. He said one time when he was little that Mama Stella's brother had a moonshine still up on the mountain by their house, and he said Grandma would hang the pants upside down on a clothesline to warn him if the revenuers was around. He would know not to come down off of that mountain. There was 13 creek crossings to get to his home place in Little Laurel. Grandma Stella was where I learned to do different types of canning techniques and preserving. She even canned her pinto beans, soups, and stews. All of my grandparents were taught to teach their children and grandchildren how to do this stuff. It was their way of life. People had what they had because they had grown it that summer. They would prepare and preserve everything that they wanted or needed for a year's supply. If they wanted jams and jellies, they didn't go to the store and buy that stuff. All they had to buy was the sugar and the sure gel. All the rest of it was stuff that they had got from the land. There was berries in the yard growing. They had a strawberry patch. They had rhubarb and gooseberries and a grape arbor. Papa had all kinds of stuff. He grew his own horseradish and everything. I always wanted to cook as far back as I can remember. I followed my mom around when I was little. I was an only child, and she taught me to cook at a very young age. I helped them do everything. It was a way of life. In teaching us to do all that, we were all they had, and most of the things that we were shown to do, I still practice those things today. So I have the barefoot cooking traditions of my Mama Lily, the Cherokee Indian influence. Then I had the Italian influence on my mom and me by my Aunt Pauline, marrying an Italian. I love to cook. It's born and bred in me. I get it honest. Here in West Virginia, there is a mixed tradition of cooking heritage. When the coal mines paid workers to come here, they came from all over the world. They had fertile soil for gardening, lots of rocks and wood for building, plenty of game and foraging in the mountains. They came from Scotland, Ireland, Sweden, Germany, Rome, Italy, Lebanon, and many more. They brought their recipes and traditions with them. We never know, and we really stop to think, where do our recipes come from? Apple butter, chow chow, pickled corn, pickled beans, pickled beets, leather breeches, deer sausage, German chocolate cake, poppy seed cake, souse. I don't know if you've ever had souse or not. It's kind of like pickled pig's feet, but it's pickled pig's head. The hot German potato salad, goulash, spaghetti sauce, soups and stews. We made homemade pork rinds in the oven and fudge, homemade cocoa, homemade potato chips and french fries, homemade jams and jellies, homemade salad dressings. It was fantastic.
Growing up in West Virginia was so much fun. Mostly hanging on the riverbank, hanging on the creek bank, climbing the mountains, swinging from grapevines in the woods. I can still hear my Uncle Darius hollering in the woods, "Oh!" before he'd take off on his big old Tarzan swing there. And I went up there one time and followed him, and it was on Easter, and I still had on my Easter frock, as my mom called it. And I went up there and got on that grapevine, and he went out there and done his big Tarzan call, and he went out and swung around, and that just looked so much fun. So I grabbed a hold of that thing and went up high, and oh, I got my white dress and my white hose and my white shoes and everything filthy dirty. But that's the way it is when you live in the mountains. Well, I want to thank everybody for stopping by my channel today and hearing my stories here from the Appalachian Mountains and more. I have so many delicious recipes that come from my ancestors that I'd like to share with you guys. If you're interested, stop by my channel. We have so much more cooking and recipes and stories. Y'all come back now. Here.